Ambassador, you spoil us. It's another 5 albums in the Apple Music top best. It's the list. Number 80, Eminem, the Marshall Mathers LP. So I had this album when I was about 10ish, maybe 11 or 12. Too young, essentially. But I listened to it loads, and I don't think I've heard it all the way through since like the early 2010s. So with the added context of adulthood and the times that we live in, how did this famously controversial album hold up? Pretty well, in all honesty. Look, it's impossible to get around it. Some of the complaints I've had with other albums on this list regarding lyrics are obviously present here. Lyrics that have aged poorly at best or have been repugnant since they were first released at worst sprout up all over the place on this album. Eminem's constant use of the F slur is unbelievably harsh on the ears. The homophobia in this album is fucking insane. But right, let's back up a little bit. A friend sent me this tweet a little while ago, and one of the top replies under it mentioned Eminem, and it's clear to see why. This album is his second release, and it talks a lot about what it feels like to be the subject of so much bad press. Eminem talks in his trademark outlandish and fuck you style about how he's just trying to make music and how the music he makes is the product of the life he's lived and the way he's been treated throughout it. It's very late 90s in that respect. The lyrics can be grotesque and hard to stomach at points, intentionally. But art that challenges is exactly the point. And all the albums on this list are works of art, obviously. But this is the first of the hip-hop albums since Tyler the Creator at number 92 that has felt like it's one worth study and thought. Art can and should be challenging, and that's what this album is at its core. Music critics Will Hermes described the album as indefensible and critic-proof, hypocritical and heartbreaking, unlistenable and undeniable. I say it's the best hip-hop album on this list so far, and also one of the best on here in general. 93 out of 100. 97, Lana Del Rey, Norman fucking Rockwell. Look, fair or not, I wrote in my notes while listening to this, Taylor Swift if she did drugs a lot. Okay, it's probably not fair at all, but it made me laugh looking back at it, so now it's in the video. I've never really gotten on with Lana Del Rey's music, the stuff that kind of went out into the mainstream, as it were. But I was quite eager to hear what her deal was properly, and yeah, good stuff. This album is hypnotic. It plays with simple instrumentation and makes it kind of psychedelic at points, which was a really nice surprise. There is some fantastic floating, kind of swimmy vibes on here from start all the way to the end. That, though, is one of my major criticisms of the album. There is a bit of variety throughout, but not a lot. Songs kind of melt into each other quite frequently. The one major departure from Lana Del Rey's style is when she covers the Sublime song Doing Time, which is tonal whiplash that I can definitely get behind. I found her lyrics to drip with a sadness, a longing, a love, and a nostalgia. I did also find that a lot of the songs felt quite similar, though she writes poetically throughout with a very natural feel. I had a really good time here. Pretty solid. 78 out of 100. Number 78, Elton John, Goodbye, Yellow Brick Road. Third album in a row to clock in at over an hour, and the longest album on the list so far at an hour 16. This was my first time listening to Goodbye, Yellow Brick Road. Not, however, my first time listening to an early 70s Elton John album. My dad had a copy of Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy that he used to play in the car all the time, and I've heard that thing back to front tons of times. So it made listening to this album quite an interesting experience, actually. First off, Funeral for a Friend / Love Lies Bleeding is maybe the best opening track on the list so far. It's so bombastic. It feels like it might have been inspired slightly by Wendy Carlos's inimitable soundtrack for A Clockwork Orange. Love that album so much. As a wee side note, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, and please let me know if it has, but have you ever had it where you hear a cover version of a song before you hear the original, and it makes the original feel really weird to you? Well, I was first introduced to that song as a teenager because it features as a live cover by Dream Theater on their EP A Change of Seasons. I could just hear the weird and unique way James LaBrie sings it on that EP in my head constantly. It was quite funny. Anyway, this album is quite top-heavy. The first 4 tracks are bangers. Then there is a massive glut of completely fine pop. And eventually Saturday Night's Alright for Fighting, before tapering off again for another 3 tracks. But here's the thing. Yes, the singles on Goodbye Yellow Brick Road are much bigger tracks in the kind of long view of Elton's career. Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy is essentially the same album, though. And crucially, it isn't an hour and 15 minutes long. This album really could have done with being pared down. It is insanity how long this album is, and that's coming from someone who listened to a lot of Dream Theater. 67 out of 100. Number 77, Madonna, Like a Prayer. My immediate takeaway at the end of this album was that it was a handful of singles with a bit of padding. In my mind, that's not a good album, even if one of those singles is Like a Prayer, maybe one of the best pop songs ever written. That's reductive though. There is a theme and a consistent style that makes this album feel like more than that. It's got a real Princey vibe going on, which is of course helped by the fact that he co-wrote and appears on one of the tracks on the album. But there's a lot of his compositional style in many of the other tracks too. I have to say, this album features one of the most insane final lines I think I've ever heard.
What do you mean it's not in the computer?
Anyway, plenty of head bopping, danceable 80s pop. I do think its inclusion on a best album list might be a bit of a stretch. 57 out of 100. Number 76, Bad Bunny, Un Veneno Sin Ti. First of all, there's a couple of things I'm going to have to say in Spanish in this, and I apologize to those out there who speak Spanish. Professional wrestler and in the shit sports agency owner Bad Bunny's album A Summer Without You is the first, I believe, and only non-English album on the list. My man, mate, pal, buddy, listen, 1 hour and 22 minutes? No, come on now. Let's stop fucking about. I, of course, listened to this album with translated lyrics on the screen, and let me tell you, that Bad Bunny fella, he loves to fuck. He is mad for it. He's shagging daft. Right, look, I'm being daft here myself, but let me tell you, this album is actually great. First off, it's nice to get something a bit different. Every track is dripping with Latino heat. The reggaeton style hypnotizes you and even makes this big white boy want to dance. But what's wild is that these songs contain a lot of heartache and sadness. Bad Bunny writes adoringly about his subjects and is often quick to point out that even though he's a great shag, he's a total prick otherwise, and how that ends up making his love life quite difficult. I've talked often on these about how I'm not super keen on an overly long album. In fact, Elton John just got panned for it as well. But in fairness to Bad Bunny, this is the new longest on the list, and it flew by. It feels insane to say that an album at an hour and 20 minutes flew by, but it really did. It felt so much shorter. I just enjoyed going from track to track and getting the vibe and the feel of every single one. Cool stuff. Here comes some more Spanish. Ojitos Lindos was my favorite track on here. Yo no soy celoso. Celoso? That's great too. The only issue with the album, and it's unfair, I know, is that repeat listens would be difficult for me, in that I'd not remember what the lyrics were and I'd have to look them up, and that's kind of a big part of what I liked about this album. An audio aphrodisiac, 81 out of 100. So there we go. Go and put on some albums. Go and put on an album. Pick an album. I'm tired of your indecisiveness.